A frost-laced dawn settled over the high desert plain, the kind that painted the earth in silver and hushed the world to breathless stillness. At the edge of that frozen quiet stood a lonely cabin, its timbers gray with age, its chimney sending up a thin ribbon of smoke. Inside, Clara McGraw pulled her widow's black shawl tighter. Rocking by the fire as her infant son whimpered in her arms. Little Eli was weak, his ribs faint beneath his skin, and Clara's own body was near spent. Her milk came thin, too thin, and she prayed over every drop that reached his mouth. On that morning, when hope felt brittle as the ice crusting the windows, a shadow moved across the snow. A lone rider approached, swaying in the saddle, and Clara's heart turned to stone. The man was Apache, his dark hair tangled, his buckskin torn and stained with blood. He carried no war cry, no raised weapon, only a bundle pressed tight to his chest. He slid from the horse with a stagger, his boots sinking in the snow. His voice rasped in broken English. "Milk, baby." Clara's hand went for the rifle by the door, her breath sharp with fear. Every story she had ever heard, every whisper from the town, Indians came to take, never to beg. Yet this one laid his bow upon the ground as if it burned his hands, and with trembling arms unwrapped his bundle. Inside was a child, fevered, mouth dry as dust, its frail body racked by pitiful cries. For a heartbeat, Clara hardened her jaw. "I've not enough for my own," she said, words like iron. The Apache's eyes lowered, shame washing over his proud face, and he swayed where he stood. He tried to retreat, tried to bow his head and pull away, but exhaustion betrayed him. He crumpled in the dirt, still clutching the tiny body. The baby's cry tore through Clara, sharper than any blade. She looked down at Eli, at his hollow cheeks, then at the stranger's child gasping for life. The weight of decision pressed heavy on her chest. She whispered into the empty air, as if to her late husband, "God help me." And then, against every warning voice in her mind, she bent down and gathered the child into her arms. Inside, she sat by the fire, her shawl drawn back, and brought the child to her breast. The infant latched weakly, then drank as though pulling life itself from her. Tears slid down Clara's cheeks, hot with shame and yet fierce with tenderness. She had denied nothing. Her own Eli nursed beside the stranger's child, two tiny mouths drawing what little she could give. When the Apache stirred awake, pain etching his face, his eyes fell upon her. He said nothing, only lowered his head in reverence, as though her mercy was more than he deserved. His name, she would later learn, was Takota, but for now he was simply a man unmade, clutching the sight of his child fed by the kindness of a widow he did not know. Night fell heavy, the wind pressing against the cabin walls. Clara tended his wounds, binding his side where arrows had torn him. He flinched, though not from her touch, but from the strange intimacy of being cared for by a woman who owed him nothing. Eli slept beside the Apache infant, the two of them breathing in unison, fragile lungs rising and falling together. Days passed in wary quiet. Takota gathered his strength slowly, his gratitude shown not in words but in deeds, splitting wood, mending the gate, leaving a rabbit on the hearth without ceremony. Clara said little, though at times she caught herself watching him with the same wary glance the townsfolk gave her whenever she went to fetch water or buy flour. Already, whispers stirred beyond her walls. Martha Hensley, sharp-eyed neighbor, had seen Apache horse tracks leading to Clara's door. Gossip carried like wildfire. The widow harbors a savage. And yet, each evening, when both children lay nestled by the fire, Clara could not regret her choice. She saw Eli smile more often, saw strength in his cheeks returning. She heard Takota hum low, strange notes that sounded like the desert wind, and without meaning to, she answered with a song of her own, a lullaby her husband once hummed while carving fence posts in the fading light. Their eyes met across the fire, two strangers bound by loss, by need, by the small warmth of living children. For that moment, all the cruel borders drawn by men, race, grief, loneliness, fell away. Clara's heart, though still heavy, whispered what her lips could not. Two broken lives made whole by the fragile hunger of children. And so the nights closed softly, firelight flickering, snow gathering outside while within the cabin 2 babies slept side by side, their breathing the steady rhythm of survival. Clara sat awake, shawl wrapped close, staring at the flames, and knew she was no longer living for herself alone. Winter pressed harder as the days shortened, the wind curling around the cabin like an old enemy, determined to break its walls. Clara's milk stretched thin, yet somehow it was always enough for both infants. In that quiet, a fragile rhythm grew. Tuckota chopping wood with slow precision, Clara stirring stew while the children dozed in their crib of rough pine. But outside, the world sharpened its teeth. Whispers carried down the main street of town. She gives her own son's milk to an Indian's brat. The words clung to her like burrs, cutting deeper each time she walked into the store with her head bowed low. One afternoon, the sheriff himself rode up, snow clinging to his beard. Amos Keller was not a cruel man, but his eyes held the heaviness of duty. He dismounted slow, hat in hand. "Clara," he said, voice hushed as though he already pitied her. "Folk are restless. They don't take kindly to you harboring one of his kind. If you keep him here, you'll lose more than your good name. You'll lose everything." She said nothing, only pressed Eli against her shoulder, rocking gently while the Apache child slept in her lap. Tuckota listened from the corner, his face unreadable, though his jaw clenched at every word. When Keller left, Tuckota began to gather his few belongings. But Clara's voice, quiet and firm, stopped him at the door. "If you walk into that snow, neither of you will live. And I will not bury another soul if I can help it." Life shrank to the size of that cabin. Days measured not in hours but in small mercies. Tuckota, once bowed low, began teaching Eli to curl his tiny fingers around his hand, whispering Apache words that rolled soft as river stones. Clara watched from her chair, marveling at the gentleness in his calloused hands. In return, she taught him English by pointing at objects, fire, milk, bread. He repeated them carefully, like treasures he feared to break. There were no grand confessions, no declarations of gratitude or affection, only the steady weaving of a bond in the silences between chores and in the laughter of 2 babies fed and safe. But the town's patience ended as quick as a gunshot. One night came the sound of hooves, then the glow of torches through falling snow. Clara's breath froze in her throat as voices shouted outside. Deputy Silas Crowder, bitter-eyed, bellowed, "Bring out the savage. You shame this town, Clara McGraw." The babies startled, wailing. Tuckota reached for his bow, but Clara laid a trembling hand on his arm. "If you fight, they'll hang you." She kissed both infants, then stepped out into the bitter dark, shawl wrapped tight, her body a frail shield against the men. Snow fell around her as she lifted her chin. "He came to me for milk," she said, voice breaking but steady. "Would you hang a man for saving his child?" The men muttered, torches flickering uncertainly. Silas spat curses, his rage louder than reason, but Sheriff Keller's hand shot up. "That's enough." His weary eyes scanned the faces around him, seeing their hesitation, their shame. "We came for justice, not murder. Go home." That night a storm howled down from the mountains, trapping them in a prison of white. Supplies dwindled fast, and Clara's strength faltered. One morning she collapsed, the runes spinning as the children cried. Tuckota caught her in his arms, lowering her gently to bed. In her haze she felt his hands, rough but tender, tending her as she once tended him. He fed broth to the infants with awkward patience, rocking them with his strong arms. Clara drifted into dreams, no longer haunted by her dead husband, but by Tuckota's steady gaze, his bowed head as he whispered to the children. When the storm broke, danger returned on its heels. Sheriff Keller came again, this time with men who carried rope and rifles. Silas stormed into the cabin, tearing Eli from Clara's arms as she cried out. "You'll answer for this," he snarled, dragging her toward the door. Tuckota rose, bow drawn, not in rage but in defense. His whole body shook with the weight of it. Clara, wild with fear, threw herself between them. "No blood," she begged, voice breaking. The world hung still, torches casting long shadows, 2 infants crying in unison. And then Keller's voice cut through. "Enough." He lowered his rifle, his face creased with weariness. This ends here. If the widow chooses to keep him, then it's her burden. The law won't hang a man for begging his child a drink of milk. The crowd shifted, anger ebbing like a tide. Some muttered, some turned away in silence. Silas cursed and spat into the snow before mounting his horse, his bitterness trailing behind him like smoke. Inside, Clara trembled, clutching her son and Tuckota's child close. She turned to him, voice raw but steady. "You're not leaving. Not anymore." Tuckota bowed his head, unable to speak, and placed his child in her arms. Clara rocked them both, her voice breaking as she whispered, "No child of God will go hungry in my house." The fire burned low that night, casting long, tender shadows over the cabin walls. Two infants slept beside one another, their breath mingling in the hush. Clara sat awake, gazing at their fragile faces, and something in her heart, worn down by grief, by judgment, by fear, began to grow again, slow but strong. And so I tell you, friend, as the prairie winds still howl across the bones of that old land, we are all mothers and fathers in the end, guardians to those who come hungry at our door. Judge if you must, but I have seen with my own eyes how love can cross the borders men draw in anger. It saves not only the one who asks, but the one who dares to answer.